20-1-0133, State of Hawaii versus Steven Capobianco, jury trial.
Good morning. The record will reflect the presence of counsel for the parties. The defendant is present. You may be seated. Good morning. And our witnesses return to the stand. Good morning. Do you understand that you're still under oath? Yes, I do. We may continue with your examination of the witness.
Thank you. And Your Honor, with that, the special agent is stepped out and approach the line.
That's fine. You may do so.
And we're in the middle of publishing State Figure 388, which is the mark for identification. Okay, special agent, sir, we left out the video here discussing the map that you have here. Continue with that. I'm not sure if we left off, but were you describing or explaining the sector of the directional?
Yes, we last left off with my testimony regarding the tower 22056, the sector that in the center of the map facing to the west, as that being the most popular and most common sector used by the defendant.
And I think you also, you commented me how you concluded or determined that was the most popular sector.
Yes. So what I do is I take the call detail records for the phone, and I was able to identify the total number of communications, both SMS and voice, and then take the number of times that the phone selected that specific sector facing at 250 degrees or west. And then we take that and divide that by the total number of communications, and that gives us approximately 62%. And the reason that I find that unique is, as I testified to yesterday, is that in my experience, I tend to find, that a phone lives or resides in an area of their most popular sector. And so when I look at this, the tower that's on top or near the top of Haleakala poses some challenges for analysis in the sense that I have a tower so high broadcasting to a large area of coverage. And I talked about that making it more difficult to precisely pinpoint an area. So that analysis that I was conducting, I was using it to have the phone tell me its life. What does the phone like to see? Because we know the phone's in charge of picking the sector. So let the phone tell me what it likes best. Okay? And that's what I did here. And so when I look at it, we also see that there's another sector on this slide, and that's 22054, and that faces to the east. And when you look at it, it's visually it seems odd. And the reason is because we have two sectors, one facing east, one facing west. But because of the nature of, again, where that tower is positioned, I don't find it surprising that a phone that it'd be out in the area of the north side of the island would see parts of both sectors. Even though I have drawn lines, that tower and sector can bleed or fade as it moves across distance. And so, obviously I've identified that the tower facing to the west is the #1 tower, the most popular. The one that I have illustrated here to the right is not the most popular tower. In fact, it's only picked a few times out of the records, and approximately 9% of the time. And so when I see that, I see the phone, and we can see this in the records, is that we see the phone pick the tower that faces, or the sector that faces west several times, and then all of a sudden, one event off of the sector that faces east, but then right back to the sector that faces west. So when I look at that, and I talked about this a little earlier, is that's important to me because I see a phone that has the option to pick both sectors. Now it's almost 60% of the time picking sector to the west, but a few times picking the one to the east. So I know that the one to the west is the most powerful and the strongest, but at times, depending on where the phone is in relation to where those sectors would overlap, it can still see part of the sector facing to the east.
Now, I'm hoping this next question doesn't confuse anyone at this point, but the most popular sector facing to the west, would that have anything to do with a 3G signal versus a 2G signal?
So both sectors being referenced are 3G. And as I briefly, I'm not sure if I mentioned in this proceeding or one of the other proceedings, but your phone is designed to pick 3G first. Your 3G phone is downward compatible to 2G. So if 3G is unavailable in an area, it has the ability to step down and communicate on 2G. And so what I would expect to see in the records, and what I did, is a phone, in this case, 96% of the time picks 3G towers or 3G sectors.
And so could you go through the analysis then with the numbers there as to which sectors, for lack of a better term, for which sector it coordinates or it is consistent with at this point?
Absolutely. So now with that concept in mind, let's just look at what we see for activity. At 3:32 p.m., 6:22 p.m., we have calls off of sector 22056 facing west. And then at 6:23, 22054 was selected, and that faces to the east. And then after that, right back to the tower facing west at 6:25 p.m. So that's all occurring on February 8th. And so my analysis and my conclusion is we have call activity consistent with being in an area based on that previous analysis that's consistent with what I believe to be the area of the defendant's residence.
And is there call activity through the, I guess, from the evening hours to the early morning hours, from February 8th to the early morning hours of February 9th?
Not depicted on this slide.
I'm showing you what is page 5 of State's Exhibit 388, marked identification. Can you tell us what we're looking at here?
This is another AT&T tower that was selected, and specifically we're still on February 8th, and we're looking at 6:45 p.m., 6:47, and 6:48. All three of these are a voice call. All three are a 3G tower. And we can see that the tower is located over in the area of just to the east of actually the Maui address. And that tower is 2521. We can see clearly that its sector faces back in the direction of the defendant's residence on Kalipo in Haiku. Now, so my conclusion from this activity is we have call activity consistent with being in the area of the residence.
And showing you page 6 of, I guess, State's Exhibit 388, marked identification.
So now we're back to that first slide of the tower that's on Haleakala, and we're seeing those same two sectors again. What's unique to me in this analysis is if we look at the date and time, we're looking in the evening hours of February 8th from 7:28 p.m. to the early morning hours of February 9th at 6:30 a.m. And why that's unique to me is there's another technique that we use to identify a likely area that someone lives in, and that's the first and last. And so think of it this way. The last thing we typically, or many of us typically do before we go to bed, is use our phone. And we register with a cell tower, and we mark the last place we were at night. Now, the same result is true in the morning. The first thing we typically, most of us do is reach for our phone and use our phone and then mark ourselves again. And what's unique to me about that is I'm able to show the last tower that a phone used at night is then the same tower they picked in the morning, indicating to me that they live or slept within that area. Okay? And so when we look at this analysis, we see clearly that we have a phone ending in 4842 belonging or associated with the defendant, picking a majority of the time tower 22056 and 2053, the sector that's facing to the west. And we can see that in the evening of the 8th from 8:41 p.m. to 9 p.m. And then again in the morning from 2:35 to 6:30 a.m. Although one time it did pick that tower faces, or the sector that faces east. And that sector is 22054. And it picked it at 7:28 p.m. And so when I look at this, I still believe that activity is consistent with being in the area of the defendant's residence.
And going to the next slide, showing you page 7 of State's Exhibit 388 marked for identification.
Okay, so after the phone is in an area that I believe is consistent with the defendant's residence, we now have the early morning activity continuing on the 9th. And so when we look at it from 7:23 a.m. to 12 p.m., we can see on our map we've transitioned to a new area. And that new address that I've provided that has a red box around it is 49 Baldwin Ave, and I've identified that as Mana Foods. And we can see that the phone selected one tower, but 2 sectors. And looking at both of those sectors from 7:23 to 12 p.m., that call activity is now consistent with being in the area of Mana Foods.
And are these all, the call activity, are they a mix of voice as well as text? Or?
Yes, sir. When we look at this, the first 2 events that occurred at 7:23 and 7:42 are text messages. Then at 8:13, 11:59, and 12 p.m. are voice. And then a text message also came in at 12 p.m.
And showing you page 8 of the same exhibit, State's Exhibit 388 for identification.
Okay. As we're just going to continue to progress in time. We're still February 9th. We're at 4:23 p.m. to 8:34. I have the records provided below for you. You can see that a majority of that activity in the description is text messages in and out, as well as 2 voice calls during that time period.
And going to page 9 of the same exhibit.
So the first call at 4:23 hits the most popular tower and sector, the one facing to the west. And that's at 4:23. At 4:24, the phone picks a tower down near the airport. And if you think back for a second, the previous slide had the call activity consistent with being in the area of Mana Foods. And then we have the next 2 calls at 4:23, 4:24, hitting towers a significant distance apart. So the thing we have to realize in this is that this tower does cover a large portion of the west side of that Haleakala. And so it would not surprise me to see a phone pick this tower and this larger tower within short sequences of each other, but yet the phone still be down in the area of the airport. After that, we have call activity that continues off of 2053 and 22056, the sector in the center of the map, and that's from 4:25 all the way to 8:34 p.m.
And I'm not sure if I understood this right, Special Agent Easter, the calls that are depicted in that rectangle at 4:25 p.m. or 4:23 p.m., 4:25 p.m. to 8:34 p.m. Is that consistent with the calls being on the west side or the east side of the island at this point?
No, I believe that this tower be based, and let me just help frame this a little bit, is this tower is roughly at 6,600 feet. The mountain itself goes up to 10,000 feet. And so this tower, if we look at the top of the mountain being here, the tower is about down here, several thousand feet below. So I don't believe, based on my training and experience,
I'm going to object this to lack of foundation.
All right, I'll sustain the objection. You may supplement your foundation.
What training and experience would you rely on in discussing, I guess, the height difference between a tower and a mountain?
So I have Google Earth Pro, which allows me to drop a push pin on Google Earth at the exact spots of the tower and the exact spot at the top of the mountain, which then gives me an elevation.
And based on your training and experience, what effect, if any, does that have with respect to the tower you're discussing here?
So in
I'm
3G,
going to object. I think this goes into a 104 hearing more than just something here.
It appears that this is foundational, but let me just review that to make sure. Well, I think you should continue to supplement your foundation, both as it relates to the training and experience as well as the, because it may be that the objection also covers the particular land features here on the island. I believe that may be part of the objection here, so, and well, if for no other reason than it's part of my ruling, so.
This one, Judge.
So you'll need to supplement your foundation.
Sure.
I'll sustain the objection.
But respectfully, I think that the foundation that's being contemplated is one that would be done in a 104 and Daubert type hearing rather than just this. He's been qualified as an expert in analyzing historical cell phone data, not engineering principles
No.
of towers.
Judge, and that's not entirely true. He's also, as part of
Perhaps
the,
we can approach that.
Let me have, allow the prosecution to supplement the foundation. You may voir dire in aid of an objection if so desired. Proceed.
thank you. Now, Special Agent Easter, you testified earlier that part of your responsibilities and duties as a historical cell site analyst or cell tower analyst, part of that would entail mapping, is that correct? Or map casting?
A majority of what I do is mapping cell site records.
And as part of the mapping is concerned, does that include, I guess, taking into consideration the geographical areas, the topography, and things that you're discussing now?
Yes, it does.
And how, if any, does that relate to, or does that affect your, I guess, analysis when you do a cast mapping of this sort?
So taking into account terrain features is important because we talk about this idea that the phone picks the strongest tower. Well, when we see on a map that a tower is slightly closer, in our minds we think, well, why didn't it pick the closer tower, right? Well, one of the defining things or one of the elements that affects signal strength or the best signal, which is what your phone is choosing the sector on, is obstructions, okay? So obstructions can come in different varieties. We have obstructions in an urban environment, which are large buildings, large vehicles and buses that may be in your way. And in more rural areas, we have topography or mountains and valleys. And so when you think to yourself of your phone, your phone needs line of sight for best signal. So the clearer I see a tower, the better the signal. And so if I take my phone and hide it behind a mountain, it doesn't see that tower so clearly anymore. The same is true if the tower's on the other side of a mountain, because it takes line of sight to produce the best signal. And so that's why it's important for me to understand that I have a tower that is not truly at the top of the mountain, but slightly below, which creates the aspect of a mountain high, a tower slightly low, and then a phone way down towards sea level.
And just as a further foundational question, what type of training, education, and including experience did you receive with respect to taking geographical considerations into play as well as the topographical considerations you just described?
Well, in our training, we not only meet with the providers and other individuals to teach us the importance of taking topography into effect, but we can rely on just some of our own common sense. Is we don't take our phone and go hide behind something when we want to make a call. I don't have a good signal. Maybe I'll hide behind this tower or behind this wood thing and it'll get better. No, all of us go like this. Because we know, whether you knew it from experience or maybe you did some reading, we all kind of do this to get a signal. Or we're about to get in an elevator. Hey, hold on, I might lose you. I'm about to get in a metal box. Now, we can supplement that with my training of drive testing or field testing. So as part of my certification, I'm also certified in surveying equipment, which is equipment that I would drive throughout a community and measure the signal strength. And I've measured large portions of California as well as other parts of the country. And I can tell you, when you get behind mountains and buildings, you lose line of sight. And you can see that in the field testing. And
so in this instance, Special Agent Easter, I'm not sure if you testified in this hearing or private. Were you able to come to Maui to do any type of field testing?
My initial goal in the visit in July was to conduct a field test. And the field test was going to be in an effort to identify the east coverage area to the north. However, getting here and realizing that there are not roads to drive on Haleakala, I can't conduct a true field test to identify all the areas. And so I would have only been limited to just checking small spots where there's a road. And so it would yield a result that would not be complete in the analysis. So a field test is rather easy in a very urban environment because there's streets to drive. And I literally would have probably had to put a backpack on and hike all of Haleakala for months on end to get a field test, and it's just not reasonable.
Now, you're describing, I guess, the difference in the elevation between the tower that's number 2056, I believe.
It has two IDs, just depends on the frequency, but 2053 and 22056 is facing west.
And you're about to explain, I guess, the height differential between the tower and the mountain itself.
And I think maybe I've gone over it quite a bit, but I think that my conclusion is rather simple. It doesn't surprise me to see that this sector, which I have my stick at, is providing coverage to a large area of the island, to include the defendant's residence as well as down into specific areas near the airport that is illustrated by the sector at 22641. So the conclusion from this slide is just rather simple, ladies and gentlemen. The call activity is consistent with previously the phone having been in the area of Mauna Foods, then likely in the area of the airport, and then traveling east into the area of the coverage for the large tower on Haleakala. That's it.
So, Your Honor, I'm going to maintain my renew my objection as to lack of foundation.
The court will overrule the objection. Thank you.
Thank you. Now I'm going to.
Your Honor, may I have the opportunity to voir dire as successful?
Oh, if you wish to, certainly. I'm sorry. I didn't realize you wanted to voir dire in aid of an objection. Go ahead. Please do so.
So, Special Agent, is it accurate to say that relative to that analysis and opinion that you just gave, it would be based on an incomplete analysis in contrast to a complete analysis that a true field test would have yielded?
No, I don't call it incomplete because it's a complete analysis of the records that are available to me in this investigation. And a field test, as I briefly described, is just unreasonable in the sense that there isn't the capability for me to put the equipment on my back and do a trip through all of the mountains for months on end.
It would be unreasonable to do that, but you'd agree with me that it would yield the most accurate result.
Well, you have to be careful. They're both accurate. Both sets of information are accurate, right? The CDRs are accurate, and that information is accurate. The field test would also yield accurate information. What the field test would do that is different is provide more precision. Okay? So it's not a matter of accuracy because both are accurate. What would be different is the preciseness. The field test would allow me to differentiate between exact limits of where the phone would have had to have selected this or had to have, when I say this, 2053 or 22641. So it's a matter of precision or limits, not a matter of accuracy.
I'm sorry, what is the common distinction between the definitions of accuracy and precision?
His objection is vague and ambiguous.
Synonymous.
The objection is overruled. You may answer the question.
So they're not synonymous. Accuracy can deal with errors, right? So if I said 2 plus 2 is 6, we all agree that that's not accurate. If I said 2 plus 2 is 4, that's accurate. Now if I said that I am standing here and my location is A, B, and C, and I am wearing pants and a shirt, that's accurate, is it not? 100% accurate. I'm wearing pants, a shirt, and standing right here. Is it not more precise? Is it not more precise for me to say, I'm in courtroom 4, standing near the lectern, wearing a purplish colored suit, a purple tie, a white shirt, and black shoes, and have eyeglasses on. Both statements were accurate by me, were they not? Yeah. But which one's more precise? So precision is different than accuracy.
I see. Okay, so let's get over the hump of accuracy and go to precision. What's more, I guess, would you agree with me that it's more important to present precise evidence in a trial rather than non-precise evidence?
So just argumentative, Your Honor.
The objection is overruled. You may answer the question.
If it was reasonable to do a field test, I would have loved to have done one. I think it would help us identify the precise coverage areas for each sector. It just was not reasonable.
So it sounds like if we had a standard of doing things and investigating things to prove things beyond any reasonable doubt, it would require some kind of field testing for that kind of precision.
Objection, that is argument, Your Honor.
The objection is sustained.
No further questions. I'm maintaining my objection.
The objection is overruled.
Thank you, Your Honor.
The renewed objection is overruled. Proceed.
Now, just because you didn't do the field test, I just want to see if I understand this correctly. Just because you were unable to do the field test because of the terrain and what you described, based on your experience, your training, and your education in this field, would that have invalidated or contradicted the accuracy of your data that you reviewed?
Object, equally argumentative.
The objection is overruled. You may answer the question.
No, it would not have. It would have further supported the analysis.
Thank you. Are you ready for the next slide?
Yes, sir.
Okay, showing you page 10 of, again, State's Exhibit 388, mark identification.
Okay. So now we're looking into the evening hours of the night, and we're looking specifically at 9:49 and 11:20. So it's not a duration. There's actually just two events. Both are text messages. Okay, and we can see that I've highlighted the area of the crime scene out near Kenai, and we can see that we have the same tower that's up on top of Haleakala, but we have two different sectors. We still see the sector that we're familiar with at 11:20 p.m., but the text message prior to that occurred off of sector 2054 at 9:49 p.m. That text occurred off of a 2G tower, and that sector coverage area is, again, consistent now with being on towards the north side. It still, when we look at it, could be consistent with being in the area of the residence, but it also is consistent with being in the area of the Kenai crime scene area.
Okay, so you testified, Special Agent Easter, that is consistent with being in two areas. Are you able, though, based on your training, your experience, and your education in this area, are you able to tell us which area that the text message at 9:49 p.m. is more likely to have been?
Yeah, yes. So when I look at this, the total analysis, which is why I did the most popular, is the tower 22056 is the most popular. And the tower 2054 was only selected a few number of times, and those times were on February 1st, February 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th. And that total activity only accounted for less than 1% of the time. So less than 1% of the activity that occurred on tower or sector 2054, and of those activities, only one occurred outside the relative time period, which is the 9th to the 12th. So my conclusion is, I believe it's more likely that the phone is not in the area of the residence, although I can't exclude that, but I think it is more likely that it's out now in the area along Hana.
You ready for the next slide?
Yes, sir.
And showing you page 11 of State's Exhibit 388, mark identification.
So if you remember that last slide, we ended at 11:23, or can you go back to the previous slide?
Sure.
Okay. The last call that we saw in the slide was at 11:20 p.m. And this slide includes the next event at 11:23, which again is showing us that call activity on top of Haleakala. And then progresses all the way into the morning hours of the 10th at 1:53 a.m. and 6:33 a.m. And those events took place off the most popular sector here at 22056.
And again, just for benefit, are these voice communications or text?
So the events that occurred on the evening of the 9th at 11:23 are text messages. And then the events on the 10th are voice message, or voice calls.
The one at 1:53 a.m. and 6:33 a.m.
Yes, sir.
And I just want to make sure I got this clear. And so the voice calls at 1:53 a.m. on February 10th and 6:33 a.m. on February 10th. In which area are these calls more likely to be in?
Because they picked the most popular of 22056, and again are in the hours that I would expect somebody to be at their residence, I believe that call activity is consistent with being in the area of the defendant's residence.
And I'll show you page 12, again over the same exhibit.
Okay. So again, in the morning hours, we looked at this previously on the 9th, the phone traveled into the area of Mana Foods. Well, it's doing the similar thing on the 10th. At 8:35 a.m. and to 10:45 a.m., we have 2 text messages and 1 voice call. And we can see that it picked 2 towers and 3 sectors, and yet we still see a commonality that all of that is in the area of Mana Foods.
I'm showing you page 13 of the same exhibit.
This is a continuation for the 10th. We're from 10:49 to 2:18 p.m. That is all text messages. And all the text messages take place on either 22134, 2131. And that sector and tower are in the area of Mana Foods.
On page 14, again of the same exhibit.
This is the evening after the the work hour, so to speak. Is it February 10th at 5:16 to 5:49? We have 4 text messages, and those 4 text messages again are back on the tower at the top of or near the top of Haleakala. The first one that occurs at 5:16 is utilizing the tower and sector that faces towards the east, and that is 2051. And then at 5:19 and 5:49, the phone used that 2G tower again, the tower 2054. And you can see that, again, that tower is facing towards the northeast part of the island to include the Hana Highway.
So are these text messages?
Yes.
So these text messages at 5:19, 5:49, as well as at 5:16 p.m. on February 10th, which is that Monday, where is the phone most likely to be according to your training and experience?
So I believe that because we see the phone at times pick tower 2051 when it's also picking 2053, which is the tower and sector that was the most popular facing west, I believe that the phone has to be in an area that still provides coverage to the victim's residence, or I'm sorry, to the defendant's residence, but also includes an area to the east and north that includes Hana.
And is there a more likely area based on your training and experience?
Because the phone picked a 2G tower, I believe it's more likely that the phone is now out towards the east or northeast along Hana.
And showing you page 15 of State's Exhibit 388 marked for identification.
This is the call activity that's going to take us from the evening of February 10th to the morning of February 11th. It's a mixture of text and voice activity.
Showing you page 16 of the same exhibit.
This is a reflection of all that call activity that we just saw in the previous slide. And so from the evening hour of February 10th at 6:02 to the morning hour of February 11th at 5:13 a.m., the phone selected one tower, one sector, 2053, 22056. Again, supporting my opinion that it's consistent with being in the area where someone would live, so thus providing coverage to the area of the residence.
And going on to page 17 of the same exhibit.
This analysis shows the outbound calls from the defendant's phone to Carly Scott's phone, and that is from 4842 to 5332. And so this is specifically from on February 11th, from 5:47 p.m. to 6:35 p.m. We can see that they are all voice events from the description that are trying to take place. One thing I would note is when we talked about the records in the opening slides is we see seizure time, which means that the phone is attempting to make a connection. But what we don't see is elapsed time. So the fact that there's an absence of elapsed time is telling me that the phone never connected.
Okay, how many, looking at the data there, are you able to tell, or the records there, are you able to tell us how many phone calls, voice call attempts the defendant made to Charlie Scott's phone number 2805332?
I believe it's 12. I can count on 1, 2, 3, 6. It's 15. So 15 events, but if we look at this, there are a couple times where there's no cell location populated. And so those are most likely a group event with a line below because they didn't actually populate a tower.
And did you map out these 15 calls?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So show you page 18 of the same exhibit.
So when we would look at, can you go back one slide, please? I'm sorry. So when we look at this cell location, is we can see that the phone is attempting the activity off of two types of towers. A couple times it tried 3G, and then a series of times it's 1, 2, 3, 4 times it tried on 2G. And then it went back to trying 3G again. And so now let's look at this slide. I think it comes after.
Okay, and show you page 18 of the same exhibit.
So we have our outbound calls that occurred on the 11th from 5:47 to 6:35. And this is records reflect the first activity that was attempted at 5:48 and 6:05 p.m. picked the tower 2051, or sector 2051 and 22054, which is that sector that's facing east. And then after that, at 6:06, 6:07, and 6:08 p.m., the phone tried the 2G tower that's facing out northeast in the area along Hana. And then it went back to selecting a 3G tower at 6:09 and 6:35 p.m. Again, that tower facing to the east.
And again, to make sure I understand this, or we understand it, the 15 calls you just you mentioned earlier on the previous slide, are you able to tell us, based on your training and experience, where it was most likely the defendant's phone would have been when those calls were made?
Okay. And so my conclusion is based off that totality of the analysis, the most popular. And if you remember, it's my opinion that when we see the phone selecting both 2051 and 2054, that it's possibly in an area that does provide coverage to the defendant's residence, but it's most likely now in an area that's along Hana Highway to include the Kenai crime scene.
And showing you State's Exhibit, I'm sorry, page 19 of State's Exhibit 3 for identification.
Okay, so we're going to move on to the 12th.
Yeah, I'm going to go back. You know, this time we did stop at this point pursuant to a bench conference.
Correct.
Should we approach did the court make a ruling already?
Court has is consistent with the court's position, unless you have something else you want to present.
No, with the 12 minutes. You can go ahead and have a seat.
Okay, thank you.
Now, Special Agent, you said before you presented, I guess, the final product or the final report for your analysis in this case, did you go through a peer review process?
Yes.
And can you briefly explain, one, what is a peer review process that you were going through?
Absolutely. So, as a member of CAST, we conduct analysis independently on investigations. Once that analysis is completed, and I am notified that the case is set for trial, I will submit my analysis to another member, certified member of CAST, to review or peer review to make sure I don't have a typo or an error in the analysis. And during that time, it was brought to my attention that I had a typo as well as a sector that was missing. And so I then made an effort to obviously correct the error, and I submitted an updated map, which we presented here today on August 25th of this year.
And with respect to, well, first of all, the records, the phone records that you relied on, did they predominantly involve voice communication as well as text communication?
Objection leading.
Yeah, it's just for foundation.
Well, I'll sustain the objection. I'll ask you to rephrase the question, please.
What type of communications did you predominantly rely on in reaching or in preparing the map casting for us today?
So for AT&T, I relied on the SMS or text as well as the voice calls.
And is there a reason why you relied on those two types of communications with respect to the provider AT&T?
Yes, that information identifies a cell tower that the phone used to make or receive a text or voice call, which we talked about and allows me to review. The part of the records that I did not rely upon for my conclusions is the data sessions that also contain tower information for AT&T. And the reason that I don't rely on the data sessions in AT&T is in my training with AT&T is they have provided to us that the timestamp that shows up in a data session may not always be the local time, because that data session could have hit servers in the AT&T network that are outside of local time. So for example, it could have hit a server in California or elsewhere that would reflect the time zone of where the server was, thus making the data sessions appear all occurred at one time, when in reality they're not in chronological order if we looked at time zones.
Now, Special Agent Easter, based on your training and experience and education in this field, and based on your training with the other major providers that you mentioned earlier, is this common with all the major providers or with AT&T?
Objection leading.
The objection's over. You may answer the question.
I wouldn't call it common, because not every company or cell phone company provides the same types of records. Not every company provides tower information in the CDRs for data sessions. So it's somewhat unique to compare, or difficult for me to compare for AT&T to say Verizon, T-Mobile, or Sprint when their CDRs don't contain the same records.
And based on your training, experience, and education in this field, is there a difference between forensic analysis with respect to cell phones and cell site versus historical cell site analysis?
If I answer the difference between forensics and historical cell site analysis, might be, is that?
Yes.
Okay. So in my area, we consider forensics the idea of understanding what's contained in the device itself. So the forensics of the device. And there's equipment that allows law enforcement to forensically download the content that's maintained in this phone. And I would refer to that more of the forensics analysis of cell phones. Now, that is slightly different, obviously, than what I'm doing at this point, which is the historical cell site analysis. I'm not analyzing, per se, the content of the phone, but I'm analyzing its interaction with the cell phone network. And in order to get the cell phone networks, or that interaction, I have to analyze the records that were maintained by AT&T. So I'm not diving into the phone, I'm looking at the records that it created through the network.
And I'm not sure if you testified about this earlier. This could have been a previous proceeding. The techniques that you just described and the analysis that you, I guess, discussed with us today, have you ever used those techniques and analysis in I guess, in the field when looking for either a fugitive or a missing person?
Yes.
And how often would you have done that?
Wow. Hundreds of times. I worked a homicide case this morning. So it is my life. I look at records every day for people. It is what I do. So to quantify it, it's hundreds of times.
I have no further questions at this time.
I have no questions for this witness, sir.
I'm sorry, I did have one last question. And this is just foundation. Did anything you just testified to, is it to a reasonable degree of scientific certainty based on your training, experience, and expertise?
Well, I don't use the term scientific certainty. But it is accurate and verified by the analysis that I did complete and my training and experience of the records. So it is as accurate as it can be based on the information that is provided to me.
Okay, thank you.
All right, we'll take a recess at this time. Thank you.